by bringing an artist, a renowned artist who for decades has an incredible art career, and that he has created, and you will see soon, a magnificent, elegant art installation. And so it's an introduction to not only an artist that you might not know his work, but also, again, the idea of a public-private partnership, this time with City CRA and Art Life. But I'm going to give the honor to Gopal to introduce the artist. And once he introduces the artist, if you don't mind, Mayor, I'm going to turn one of the lights off so you can see the presentation better.
Yeah, that's fine. And by the way, apparently I made a misstatement. It is 10 a.m. and not 10 p.m.
Oh.
Just in case anyone is wondering why we're so light out.
That's right. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Yes.
And you know, that's appropriate because this artist deals with time.
Okay.
So very good. So Gopal, if you don't mind coming up and introducing the artist, that would be wonderful.
Welcome, Gopal.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Abile. Thanks for the opportunity. Good morning. Gopal Rajagowda, partner with Related Southeast. We are so pleased to be talking to you all this morning about a major public art installation we are proposing for the park space at around One Flagler. With me this morning on Zoom from my team is Rena Blades, our art consultant, and Corinne Penksa, senior associate with Related. And it brings me great pleasure to introduce the artist whose sculpture we are proposing for this very important site, Fred Eversley. He is joined this morning by his wife, Maria, who is integrally involved in managing all of his projects. Fred Eversley is an LA-based sculptor, one of the group of artists associated with the 1960s LA light and space movement. His work has been featured in over 200 exhibitions at prestigious museums, galleries, and art festivals worldwide. He was appointed as an artist in residence at the Smithsonian Institute in 1977, and for 3 years, he had a studio at the National Air and Space Museum. His work is in 35 permanent collections, including the Whitney and the Guggenheim, and he has executed 20 large public commissions. At heart and by training, Fred is an engineer, and his sleek creations in poured acrylic forms, stainless steel, and bronze frequently take on the forms of discs, parabolas, helixes, lenses, and shapes he sees perfect. Fred was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1941, graduated from Brooklyn Technical High School, and received a degree in electrical engineering from the Carnegie Institute of Technology, now Carnegie Mellon University. From 1963 to 1967, he was a senior project engineer, instrumentation systems at Wiley Laboratories, where he was responsible for supervising the design and construction of high-intensity acoustic and vibration test laboratories at NASA facilities. He moved to Venice, California in 1964, where he became friends with several Los Angeles artists, and retired from engineering in 1967, becoming an artist full-time. He now works in New York City, where his upcoming one-person exhibitions at the Orange County Museum of Art and the David Kordansky Gallery are highly anticipated. It is an immense honor to have him with us this morning to present his monumental, elegant, and important public sculpture for One Flagler. Thank you, Fred and Maria. It's all yours.
Can't really hear him.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you all?
Well, wonderful, thank you.
Fantastic. I'm just introducing the presentation I gave when I was down in Palm Beach in the beginning of this project. And basically, I don't know, many people have seen this already, but it is going through the whole history of my involvement of energy and how it affects some of my historical pieces, and how all of this leads up to my concept for the commission that have been granted in Palm Beach. These are some of my early sculptures from the 69 and 70s, and basically the Palm Beach sculptures reference very similar kinds of shapes and technologies that I did, 40 years ago. And I don't know if you could read the parabola is my primary focus of all of my art, because it's the only shape that focuses all forms of energy to a single focal point. And so my round pieces, especially the lenses, utilize this, and the piece that I am proposing for Palm Beach also utilizes this shape. This is Maria stepping through a series of my early lenses. This is in the production phase of the lenses. The left piece is my largest cast polyester piece. It's for a Linux Square shopping center in Atlanta. It's 8 feet in diameter. I did it specifically for that shopping center. And the piece on the right is a piece I did for my show in Miami in '84 at Bacardi Gallery. And that is, again, a circular piece comprised of openly made with plastic and steel triangles to create a circular shape. This is my first large parabolic piece. It's a piece for the Miami airport. It used to be for many, many years, the center photograph was at the entrance to the Miami airport, and now it's at the exit of the Miami airport, so you're forced to go around it as you leave the airport. And it is a double parabolic sculpture on a single base, a circular base, and it acts as a vertical axis windmill, originally generating its own power to power the neon around the edge. And then people got worried about securing their kids climbing on it and lighting it, so it's not bolted down to the ground, and the neon is plugged into the main power from the airport. This is a piece I did for actually my very first commission, and it's for the hotel in Dallas, the Hyatt Regency Hotel, Hyatt Regency Hotel in Dallas. I did this for the Hunt family. It's the right-hand side piece. It's a sphere filled with crystal clear mineral oil that flows over the outside surface to be circulated. And the two pieces to the right is the same similar concept, but here that on a parabolic, on a pyramidal base that is hollow or filled with oil, and then this piece was shown for about 2 years in the great lobby of the American Institute of Science in Washington, D.C., and then at the headquarters for the American Institute of Architects in Washington, D.C. So one of the center is the image when it was at the National Academy of Sciences, and the image on the right is when it was at the offices of the headquarters of the Institute of American Architecture. This is a bronze piece. There are two left-hand centerpieces. This was done, they're parabolic, that happened to be bronze. The first one was shown, I mean, it's the same piece, it's now in Washington, D.C., but originally it was shown in Venice, California, at the, in the Plaza of the Republic. And then it was taken back to Spain, highly polished, and now it's at the Casting Arts Center in Washington, D.C. And the piece at the right is a mirror polished color stainless steel piece I did for a private sculpture garden in the north of Italy. Okay, this is getting now to the issue at hand, which is the sculpture for West Palm Beach, and is to celebrate the architect who designed a church right opposite the where the sculpture is going to be, and right next to the newly dated building. And basically, the whole concept of the sculpture came up in respect to the design, the 8-column design of the church. It's a very famous church. And the same architect designed the major building for the Philadelphia Art Museum, a building I happen to know very well. And again, and also many buildings at Duke University. So he was a very profound architect. And this commission celebrates his history. Come on. So this is the portals of the 8 portals of the church, and the sculpture I'm proposing is 8 parabolic elements to symbolize the 8 columns of the church. And this is some other, yes, Duke University is some of the other architecture of Mr. Abel. This is just a first initial vision of the architecture, and this is now getting into the presentation I made for getting the commission. With the 8 pieces of transparent polyurethane elements, parabolas, spread across the water and the land right opposite the water as you enter the park from Flagler Street. So, I mean, as you enter the park, walking in from Flagler Street, you will see this, the church on the left and the sculptures on the right, and the office building by the neighbor in the center. This is now looking sort of from the back, the lake view, I mean, but looking from the back, from the rear side of the parabolas. Same thing here, as you enter. And that's the night view of the parabolas and the office building. And the office building also has, if you notice, 8 divisions, 8 So, I mean, of the church, 8 parameters and 8 windows or divisions of the building. The lighting is underneath the piece. Each piece sits on a base that has lighting integrated in it. So that at night, the light shines up through the sculpture, through the plastic element, and illuminates the front edge. So we're just stepping through various views as you walk around the piece from the front and now from the back. And we've specified seating areas for people to sit and contemplate and just relax. That's looking down from the heights of the, yeah, I'm not, I know, this is looking at the floor onwards.
Herald to harmony. It's a beautiful thing.
The material is crystal clear polyurethane. This is not polyurethane here, but and these has some polyurethane examples here. William Blake is a person that I've referenced my entire career because he was the first person to me that spoke about energy and perception and eternity and such. This is when I was, 14 years old. I got involved in it and started making my first parameters around the same time using anyway, that's the last slide, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eversley. This is a beautiful, beautiful, I believe, a beautiful piece of work, and I know it will be an icon in our city. This is something that will probably, people will gather around from far and wide just to witness this. Thank you. Quick question I have, 2 questions. One is the, this is a nighttime vision we're looking at now. Is that the color that it will be, or will that change from time to time?
It can be any color. In other words, you can, again, change the color just by changing the color of the light underneath it.
Okay.
And that needs to be programmed so that it changes over time, automatically.
Okay. The other question I have is, and being sensitive to the fact that we are now in hurricane season, are these removable, or will they withstand hurricane strength winds?
They're removable by unbolting the base from the underneath base. I mean, yes, they're removable. They're meant to be removable. They're meant to be removable if you want to remove it for some reason.
Yeah, like a hurricane.
They're permanent unless there's something, there was some reason that they wanted to be removed, or you want to change the color of the light bulb or whatever.
All right, so Gopal, I assume that Related will have some kind of contingency plan if we've got a hurricane barreling down on us?
I think also we're going to be working with federal structural engineering.
Right.
So
Okay.
that these, you won't have to remove them, but we'll have the option of them.
Okay.
But so in order to go through all the permitting, they'll have to be structurally engineered to hit the wind codes for art, which is
Right.
lower than the buildings.
Okay, very good. Questions, Commissioner Baduzzi?
Thank you for the presentation, and it seems like an exciting project. One question I had is similar to the mayor's question about the building materials themselves, the polyurethane. You know, in our South Florida sunshine, I know that, you know, plastics and other types of things tend to degrade in the sunshine. Were these engineered to withstand the constant Florida sunshine, and will it over time require any maintenance?
Polyurethane the polyurethane is very UV resistant. So I do not expect the sun to have an effect over time. Can I speak about 50 years? No, I can't, because polyurethane hasn't been around 50 years. Can I talk about 10 years? I can talk about 10 years for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lambert?
Thank you so much. This really is beautiful, and I love that it will be along Flagler where people will be able to see it and view it, even if they're not visiting these buildings there. One of the things that struck me was when you were showing the different views of this piece is that it seems like because there's 8 of them, they transcend different elements. So they're in the water, then I saw it on the grass, and did we even see one that is in part of the bench? Is that right?
No.
That one.
Yeah, but it's not part of the bench. It's on the edge of the water.
Okay. Well, I just love how it's, you know, not necessarily just confined to one area, but it seems to be expanded throughout to the entire walkway. And I was just curious if there was any meaning or reasoning behind that.
Well, it's a matter of trying to cover that area. In other words, I had one concept that they were all in the water. Then I had one concept when they were actually on the ground, that people could walk around it. And what this is a compromise, number one, so that they're on the grass and on the edge, but it does not impede people from walking on the ground. They all could be put in water, but then that sort of does not cover the whole environment in front of the building and the church and the garage and such. So what we tried to do was to figure out a combination given the configuration of the water and the grass. We were given this. This was not part of our design. This is designed by the architects before we ever got involved.
Well, Mr. Eversley, I hope I was clear. I'm in favor of that. I think it looks beautiful, and I'm appreciative that it's not all in the water or not all in the grass. So thank you.
Mr. Eversley, can you talk about the size, the scale of these? How large are they?
They're 16.5 feet.
Wow.
Tall.
Beautiful.
I'd like to just add one other point that on the different areas.
If you could talk in the mic, go Paul.
Fred, I was just going to add one other point, that even though they're all 16 feet tall, they're intended to all be at the same height. So that even though you have some at higher elevations, the plan is to install them so that they look like they're lined up at the same height across the board.
Right. Exactly.
Other questions, Commissioner Ward?
So the 2 or the 3 that are outside, are they intended to be able to be interactive, or are we going to be did you want people to actually go up and take pictures and touch them, or are we going to have some kind of prohibition on that?
They are designed that people, the 2 pieces on the grass, but people to absolutely walk up to it, stand in the middle of it, and take pictures. One person could be on the other side and a person in the front taking photographs. So, yes, the pieces that are on the grass are meant to be interactive with the pedestrians.
Yes.
I'm noticing on the side, you guys have the quote that you had in your last slide. Is that intended to continue to be there? Okay, fantastic. But to see a world in a grain?
Yes, the intention is intended to be there. I mean, nothing's locked in stone, but the quotation right now should be there.
Okay. Any other questions, Commissioners? President Fox.
Thank you so much. This is absolutely stunning. I walk by one of Related's other buildings, 360, every day, and I stop to watch the people taking pictures of it, and it adds so much to our community to have these gorgeous art pieces. So thank you so much. My question is, how long does it take you to think of something like this, design it, create it? I'm just curious what your method is.
Well, number one, the parameter I've been working with for 50 years. So, I mean, that's not new. It's a matter of how I use it in this environment. And if I use it in this environment. Water forms I've worked with over the years, this seems the most appropriate to show for the environment. And again, we're trying to reference the 8 columns of the church and the 8 columns of the office building. And so it worked out, I mean, we went through, I don't know how many permutations of different materials, different heights, different locations, different everything. And we finally came up at the very end of a long, drawn-out design session here with this design, which we felt was the best that there was. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a session with people from SOM, the architect, and they agreed with us that this was a perfect complement to their architectural design. The pool and the layout of everything was done before we got involved. And it was done by SOM in conjunction with God knows who else. So what we attempted to do was to work with what we were presented as already after Complet, the design of the church in relationship to the office building and the parking garage and the park in front and the pool. I mean, had I been doing the architecture, I would have had the pool bigger myself and had all the pieces in the water, but that wasn't an option. I mean, the SOM design is the SOM design, and we fit into the entire, try to fit into the entire design and entire layout that we were presenting.
Commissioners, I think it's also, not many of you, but not all of you were on the commission when we approved this, the One Flagler project. But one of the essential agreements that was made is that homage would be paid to the architect, Julian Abel. And so this, with the public art piece. And so this does pay, I think, it pays homage to his history, and his thought process in a very creative way. And as the history of West Palm Beach continues to be written, I believe that this will constitute a major chapter in that book about an African-American architect, and homage being paid by an African-American sculptor. It speaks volumes about our community. Any other?
So this location has an incredible amount of history to me. I mean, yes, about the architect and about, I know that church for the last literally 45 years. I never knew it was designed by a black person. I've gone across that bridge to Palm Beach several hundred times. Mm-hmm. The first gallery on the right-hand side as you cross the bridge was my gallery that I showed in the 70s. The gallery is still there. The gentleman who is the owner of the gallery died. His son now runs the gallery. I stay physically in their house at the very end of Miami Beach. So I know the location, I know the bridge, I know everything about it for literally 40 years, 45 years. I've shown in four different galleries on Flagler Avenue in Palm Beach. And so, to me, it was a very personal, this whole commission is a very personal expression of something that I was so familiar with over such an enormous part of my life. And I've seen that bridge. I never knew it was designed by a black person. I never knew anything, but I've seen that building, hundreds and hundreds of times since I crossed the bridge. So, I mean, to have the opportunity to do something to celebrate him and to celebrate that location was a very attractive thing for me as an artist.
Well, hopefully, Mr. Eversley, it will be a significant part of your legacy as an African-American sculptor, and that young boys and girls who look like me will learn more about you and your work, as well as the work of Julian Abel. So this is a win-win, and thank you, Related, for getting us to this point. Gopal, do you want to talk about how Related even came to this decision and located Mr. Eversley?
Sure. Well, as Mayor, as you pointed out, we were sort of, amazed to hear the story about Julian Abel and the history of the church. The original architecture firm was Horace Trumbauer Architects. Julian Abel was, in fact, the lead designer for the firm across everything they were doing across the country. So, very touched by the history, and as you all know, this has been a long journey on the One Flagler project, which many of you have been involved in, up to this point. So, we wanted to do something special in the park. We named the park Julian Abel Park, and to add to that, we wanted to commission an African-American artist to honor Mr. Abel. So what we actually did was we held a competition with 3 artists, and all the pieces were quite phenomenal and exciting. But we really felt very strongly that Fred had the most thoughtful proposal, and in terms of how the pieces sit on the site, and effectively creating a gathering space and a reflection place for what I think is one of the most important positions in the city. It is the gateway coming from Palm Beach, highly viewable from different directions. But that's how we came to this process. I will say and commend Fred and Maria. A lot of work has been done. I think he was asked the question by Commissioner Fox, how long does it take him to come up with one of these ideas? I was about to say over 50 years, because he's been working in this medium and in this context for over 50 years, and highly recognized, as I said earlier, in some of the greatest private collections in the world, and museum collections. So hopefully that answered the question.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any other questions, commissioners? All right, Sabila, you want to finish us?
Yeah, just,
take us home?
Yes, thank you to everyone. Thank you, Fred and Maria, for that. It was amazing. I hope you thought it was amazing, too. I just want to echo something that you said, Mayor, that I think it's important to realize that an installation like this is a gift, and it's a tribute to celebrate our city, to celebrate everything about it, but also of acceptance. That's what I felt when I saw it, and I hope that you do, too. I would like to let you know that moving forward, I'm going to go to Art Life next, is my next stop with this presentation, and from there I'll go to CRA Board and City Commission. So you will see it once again, but you saw the long version with the artist, and so you understand it more, and so when it comes back to you, it'll be a shorter, condensed version.
Who will own this piece?
The City of West Palm Beach. So the public-private partnership, once again with Related, is that we are bringing our resources together, the CRA included in this one, and the idea, once again, is to make that cultural impact, and by combining all our resources, once again, Related is more than happy to say, in the city of West Palm Beach, you will now own this piece in your public art collection.
Wow, that's wonderful. Fred and Maria, thank you so much for this presentation, and thank you for your interest in the city.
Thank you. No, this is going to be probably, I mean, at 81, it's probably my last major outdoor piece. I mean, who knows? But nothing goes on forever. So, I mean, if this is my last major outdoor thing, so be it. It's in a great location, and a location I know for very well for very many years. I wish all the people I've known down there over the years were still alive to see this thing. I'm delighted.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you very much, and that ends the discussion on this item. We appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for Sabile.
You have another, all right.
Just for Sabile, not for the
Commissioner
artist.
Warren has a
Yes.
question, Sabile.
Yes, Commissioner. Hi.
Sabile, who will be responsible for maintenance if maintenance is
The
needed?
Art Life. So Art Life has its own independent maintenance. So depending on what the maintenance is then I put aside those funds. Again, it's separate from anything, so it stays in the public art account.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you again, Sabile. Thank you, Gopal, and Related. All right, item 2, City Cyanotoxin Communication, Markham LLP Review and Recommendations. Let me talk about how what we're doing here. I think 3 of you were on the commission last Memorial Day when we had a situation with cyanotoxin and a bit of a crisis with our water situation. In the wake of that, I did 2 things. One is I wanted to convene and called for a national a review by a board of national experts on the city's processes, what the city could do better to become more resilient to the cyanotoxin situation, and so that board has reported to this commission and will continue to do so going forward. But there was also a question as to our communication regarding the cyanotoxin situation. So I wanted to make sure we had some experts look at what had happened and do an after-action report, so that in the event that we have situations like this, whether it's our water or whether it's another crisis situation, we will have learned from what has happened in the past. So, obviously, when something does not go as well as you expect or as you expect in the city, to me it's important not only to address the situation directly, but to take a look at what has happened in the past and see if there are any lessons that could be learned. So Markham has, who are also our external auditors, we did an RFP and they responded, and so they have issued a report and they're going to report on that body of work now. But this is to tell us what we could do better internally as an organization to communicate on situations such as this. Ms. Johnson, anything you want to add to that?
No, Mayor, you covered it well.
Okay, very good. Mr. Rodriguez.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. Jose Luis Rodriguez, Assistant City Administrator. Joining us this morning is Moises Ariza, partner with Markham, and Hermes Garzon, Senior Manager with Markham, and they will be sharing with you their report on the city's cyanotoxin communications.
Good morning, Honorable Mayor and City Commissioners and meeting attendees. My name is Moises Ariza. I'm with the firm of Markham LLP, and for the record, we're located in 525 Okeechobee Boulevard. And we were engaged by the City of West Palm Beach to provide consulting services regarding its sea toxin water incident, and we're thankful for the city to give us the opportunity. A little bit about our firm. We're a CPA and forensic accounting firm. And for over 70 years, we've been serving the government sector. This is what we do, serving about 51 government municipalities in the state of Florida and 250 in the East Coast, U.S. In summary, our work plan consisted of gaining an understanding of the city's handling of the cyanotoxin incident from inception to end, as also interviewing and reviewing relevant documents and records that were made available to us by several parties. We also provided the report on the 11th of January that went into greater detail regarding the procedures that were performed and our ultimate recommendations. My colleague Hermes Garzon will go over the report in further detail, but I did want to highlight the introductory section of the report. The second page of the report included the appendix that described in further detail the procedures. Many of them which relate to obtaining documents made available by the U.S. Department of Health and your internal Public Works Department staff, as well as external municipal stakeholders. In summary, our plan, as the mayor had mentioned, was to review the policies, procedures regarding the operations and shutdown of the water distribution site related to the seawater toxin. Also included in our report, we have several attachments, and we highlighted some of the key items that were made available to us. That is inclusive of email communications between the Director of Public Works and the city management and city officials. We also provide copies of the results of inquiries between Markham and the interviews that we held with city personnel. We also included communication letters held from municipal stakeholders that were provided to us. Also, copies of the drinking water health advisories issued by the city of West Palm Beach that were analyzed. Health advisories issued by the U.S. Department of the Environmental Protection Agency, and communications between the city of West Palm Beach management and the Florida Department of Health. So we also provided copies of all those attachments as part of our report. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Hermes. Hermes is one of our CPAs and also a certified fraud examiner, specializing in reviewing and discrepancies regarding policies and procedures. So I'm going to hand it over to Hermes.
But before you turn it over, let me just ask you a question. Do you feel that you were limited in any way in terms of access to information, the scope of your inquiry? Were there any limits on your ability to do your job?
No, we if there was limits to our inquiries or access to documents, we would have to communicate with the city administrator. And as has mentioned to her in the past, city personnel were very gracious in providing us the information and also providing us to us in a timely manner. To repeat what I mentioned was we issued this about 6 months ago. So this document has been available to the public for quite some time now. And they were able to provide us information. Also, a lot of time was given to meeting with Hermes and myself and city personnel. So outside of all the information that was requested, emails, documents, health advisories, policies and procedures, water level results, all that information, we also met with city personnel in person and also via Zoom meetings, and they made themselves available in the early morning times and also late times based on what was requested of them. So that was not an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor,
Yes.
before we move on, I want to just clarify for the record. The communications between the staff and administration was the public utilities.
Yes.
You mentioned public works a couple of times, so it was public utilities. I just want to have the right department for the record.
Correct. That is correct.
Thank you, Mo. Good morning, Honorable Mayor, City Commissioners, and City Management. My name is Hermes Garzon. Does everyone hear me fine, by the way?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. My name's Hermes Garzon, and I'm a senior manager with Markham LLP. And I work throughout this whole process very closely with the Public Utilities Department personnel. I'm actually the one who conducted the majority of the interviews. And then before I get into the procedures performed and the results, I would just like to, if you have a hard copy, feel free to follow along. But I would like to go ahead and just go through a brief overview, because I believe that would give help provide a better understanding of the overall timeline of events, and then also the water toxin contaminant in question. So, obviously, before we started our interview process, we wanted to just understand exactly what who was serviced by the public water systems, and we noted obviously that they service their residential, commercial customers of the city, and also the city does provide clean drinking water to the beach in South Palm Beach. This is relevant when we get to the notification process of who was notified, when they were notified, so that is relevant. In addition to that, we also wanted to gain an understanding of what type of water contaminant resulted in the health advisory. That's also important.
And if you could hold on for a minute, we are now handing out the hard copies of the report to the commissioners. They did not have them.
Okay.
Thank you.
You want me to hold off until everyone?
No, you could proceed now that we have it.
Okay, perfect. So the cyanotoxins in question here are just naturally produced in surface waters around the world by various species of blue algae. In June of 2015, the United States Environmental Protection Agency actually published for the first time a 10-day drinking water health advisory for cyanotoxins, specifically the microcystins, which is the M toxin, and then the cylindrospermopsin, which is the C toxin, and that's the more important toxin. That's the actual toxin that was found in the finished drinking water. And once that publication, was made, the city actually incorporated, and I found this very interesting, incorporated monitoring of both these toxins as of August of 2016. So even though it wasn't a requirement at that point in time. So one important element to note as well is that these toxins are considered unregulated contaminants. So that's another important distinction. We wanted to know, okay, is this, obviously there's hundreds and hundreds of water contaminants that you could find in drinking water. So the distinction between, is this regulated or is this an unregulated contaminant, was very important for this whole evaluation process. And essentially the difference is that an unregulated contaminant are contaminants that are suspected to be present in your drinking water and do not have a health-based standard set under the Safe Drinking Water Act. For example, lead is a regulated contaminant, and the C toxin, which I'll refer to, is unregulated. Also, if you'd like to turn with me to page 4, page 4 gives us, based on our discussions with the relevant personnel and review of supporting documentation, we put together a timeline of the incident from the inception to conclusion. I won't go through everything in detail, but I think it is worth mentioning that prior to the C toxin water incident, that the Public Utilities Department was already monitoring this toxin for quite some time, and they would do it on a monthly basis, and they would do 4 samples of testing for this water toxin. As far as the timeline, we focused on May 17th through June 4th. On May 17th, the city collected 2 samples, 1 raw water and 1 finished water, and 2 days later, on May 19th, 2021, it was found that the sea toxin was elevated beyond the health limits established by the EPA. So that's 2 days later from when the sample was actually taken. So on that date, the laboratory manager notified the director of public utilities and the water treatment plant manager that those levels were exceeded. A decision was made on May 19th to verify those levels. So a decision was made that there would be 3 confirmation samples, one on May 24th, one on May 25th, and one on May 26th. The results from the May 24th sample, confirmation sample, which was the first one taken, was provided, the results were provided 2 days later on May 26th, and the results of the samples taken on the May 25th and 26th were provided on May 27, 2021. And at that point in time, once the 3rd confirmation sample was received, all 3 samples indicated that the levels were exceeded the health advisory limits. So an in-meeting person was conducted on the next day, which is May 28th. And on that day, the Public Utility Department's personnel notified all regulatory departments, and they also issued their public notice. As far as the procedures actually performed, as we have 8 procedures in total. Procedure number 1 was to obtain any documents regarding compliance with regulatory timeframes and process for notification to the Department of Health and Environmental Protection Agency. So in order to gain your first question is, okay, now that we've identified that this water contaminant is in our drinking water, what actual guidelines could we follow or are available to us in order to know who has to be notified, when they have to be notified, things of that nature. So we really concentrated on anything regarding unregulated contaminants, and at the federal level, state level, and local level. So on page 6 through 7 and 8, we essentially summarize the documents that provide federal regulations for unregulated contaminants, which is essentially your Code of Federal Regulations and the Federal Register. We also note that there is also state regulations, and we note which chapters based on the Florida legislator, and that could also be found on page 7, and we do highlight specifically the language that is used when a sample analysis shows the presence of an unregulated contaminant. So as far as the local level, we did not find anything specific to the sea toxin. It just referenced back to the state and federal guidelines. So our recommendation here is, obviously there's a lot of sources available to the Public Utilities Department, and we recommend consolidating that information. So essentially having something that is accessible to all levels, all relevant levels of authority, in order to know exactly where they would have to go if they needed to know any guidance regarding notification, what type of federal agencies or state agencies have to be notified, things of that nature. As far as procedure 2, 3, and 4, which is on printed page, 8, 9, and 10, these procedures, I'll kind of hit all of them at once. All of them relate to obtaining communication of when the Public Utilities Department notified, for procedure 2, the city. And for city, we mean city management and administration, Procedure 3 deals with city commissioners, and Procedure 4 deals with when were the municipal stakeholders notified, and those would be the town of Palm Beach and town of South Palm Beach. So as far as Procedure 2, we noted that city management was notified on May 28th, 2021, the same day of the actual public advisory. As far as the city commissioners, when we were speaking with the director of public utilities, when we were conducting our interviews, there was no real written notice that was provided to us for the city commissioners. It was communicated to us that the first line of notification was to the city administrators, and then they were under the impression that that would be communicated to the city commissioners. As far as the stakeholders, which is the town of Palm Beach and South Palm Beach, they were also notified the day of the notice, prior to the date of the notice. And as far as procedure number 5, entails the review of the preparation and release of the advisory to the public and the media. So in order to process if the city properly prepared and released the drinking water advisory on time, there were certain questions we asked ourselves, specifically, when was the Palm Beach County Department of Health and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection notified? We also asked ourselves, is there any guidance that communicates the time frame of when a public notice should be issued? What must be included in the public advisory, and how much public notice, and how the public notice was actually released, what mechanism. So as far as the first question, May 28th, the Palm Beach County Department of Health and Florida Department of Environmental Protection, they were actually notified May 28th. In addition to that, the first time the city was actually provided written notice that a public notice must be sent out was the same day, May 28th, around 2:17 p.m. And in addition to the time frame of if there's any time frame to release the public notice, the Environmental Protection Agency published a 10-day drinking water, which I mentioned earlier, for the cyanotoxins. So the 10-day stipulation on the advisory, it signifies the number of days in which adverse health effects are not anticipated to occur once exposure is met. This is very significant because you have to establish what that the beginning of the 10-day exposure period is. So from our understanding, the period begins not on the day the test results were actually provided, but the day the samples were taken. Obviously because, okay, you could know 2 days later, but people that were drinking the water 2 days prior are still exposed to the toxin, or potentially exposed. As far as what must be included in the public advisory, we also did determine that the EPA's website does have a drinking water risk communication toolbox. So it does actually have some templates, I'll use the word loosely, as far as when these incidents occur. So the Public Utility Department's personnel did use these templates in correlation with their collaboration with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and the Palm Beach County Department of Health. So it was very much a collaborative effort. We reviewed lots of emails, going back and forth, making sure that the Public Works Department personnel did their due diligence, and they did. They were very numerous communications, making sure that the public notice was perfect. Okay, and our recommendation here is to just establish clear indication of when that 10-day advisory, if this event were to reoccur, that the 10-day advisory period commences on the date of the actual sample. And this could be incorporated into policies and procedures as well. And I'll give more of a comprehensive review of what should be included in the policies and procedures. As far as procedure number 6, we also obtain communications and updates to the public during the incident with follow-up test results. So from the moment the initial public notice was sent out via news release, there was actually 9 updates to the public from May 29th all the way to June 4th. And these public updates incorporated or informed the public of any distributing clean water, distributing water impacts to customers, also points of distribution locations that the city set up in order for their residents to go ahead and get bottles of drinking water if they would like, if they didn't prefer not to drink any of their tap water. It also notified the public about the use of free chlorine, which was a very good disinfectant, especially for the C toxin, and so forth and so forth. But most of the public notices related to either locations where they could get drinkable water or just updates on the general progress. As far as the corrective actions taken by the city, 3 things I would like to mention. That on May 19th, 2021, which is the day the first results came back that the C toxin levels were elevated, the Public Utility Department already kind of did a preemptive strike and decided to bring on their pack basins. And this is just another form of treatment for the toxin in their water. And the pack basin is essentially a high performance absorbent engineered to remove harmful contaminants in the air, gas, and liquid phases. On May 20th, this is day after, and this is still before the public notice is issued, the city requested and received approval to utilize the Eastern Wellfield underground water, as well as the Western Wellfield reserves water in an attempt to dilute the toxins. And then also on May 29th, which is a day after the public notice, the city requested to switch to free chlorine as a disinfectant with within the Public Utilities Department distribution system as an alternative treatment method. Speaking with Daryl and his team, the free chlorine treatment was extremely effective in reducing the C toxin levels in the drinking water. As far as procedure number 7, we did also obtain a notification from the Department of Health approval to lift the public advisory. So in other words, did the city follow all the criteria that needed to be met in order to properly rescind the drinking water advisory? And we noticed that they did, the city did do their due diligence and met every single criteria. We received emails between the Public Utilities Department personnel and the Director of Environmental Health from the Palm Beach County Department of Health. And also, as far as their discussions with the Palm Beach Department of Health, there was I wouldn't say this is a real issue, but just something worth noting, that the Palm Beach County Department of Health also issued their own advisory in addition to the city. So in order to relinquish or rescind the city's public notice, they had to wait first for the Palm Beach County Department of Health to do so. And I would say the most important procedure that we performed, throughout this process is the review of policies and procedures regarding operations and shutdown of the water distribution sites during the incident. So this is really our review of any internal policy and procedures written that the city has available to them in order to address an incident of this nature. So who has to be notified, when they have to be notified, how to treat their water, do you shut down your water treatment plants, things of that nature. So as we conducted our interviews as well with the Director of Public Utilities, we noted that the water distribution sites throughout this, during this process were not shut down. So no facility was actually shut down. And the reason for that is that the water treatment plant is only shut down when it is unable to produce water when it's unable to produce water. So in this case, it was still able to produce water. In case you're asking, well, why wouldn't you shut it down? Remember that water has multiple uses. So just because you can't drink it, you could still clean with it, you could still bathe with it. So they did not shut down any locations to not disrupt those activities. And in the case of what actual existing policies were there in place, we noted that there were 2 policies in place. There was a water treatment business continuality plan, and also a 2021 hurricane plan. But those were just, those were protocols really not addressing a water contaminant incident, to be honest. It was more of protocols for preparing, staffing, organizing, organizational, operational procedures when there's a disruption in the water treatment plant due to loss of critical facilities, loss of personnel, loss of power, things of that nature. So there was no established policies or procedures in place specific for this water contaminant. The recommendations that we would recommend, and it's quite lengthy if you read as far as the bullet points, but the page 16, sorry, page 16. So based on our inquiries with the public utilities, the department personnel, there is actually no robust regulatory incident response manual that they could actually lean on. So that's also important. That's the whole reason why we wanted to determine, is this regulated contaminant? Because then they have kind of a step-by-step process that they could follow versus unregulated, which they can't really go into a specific guidance and say, okay, this is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 of the process that we have to do. So we do recommend that the city considers adopting its own internal incident response document, which outlines the necessary policies and procedures if this incident should ever reoccur. And we do give some recommendations on what should be included in the document. So first, identify the first line of defense and establish the procedures for notifying authorized individuals within the Public Utilities Department, because they're in essence the first line of defense that if this were to ever reoccur, they're the ones who are going to know first. So then it trickled down within that department, and based on what we saw, the laboratory manager, which is essentially the individual that receives the results of all the samples that are taken on a monthly basis, they're the ones who essentially get notified first. And in this case, they did their job. They notified the Public Utility Department director and the water treatment plant manager as well. So we did note that. Also, it'd be helpful maybe to list the health advisory limits. So exactly what are we talking about here? What are the measurements in the per liters of water that will trigger the water technically being deemed contaminated, and for which population? Children under 6 is the vulnerable population, and so forth for adults. And then also establish, most importantly, a form or procedure which outlines when and how to notify the city administrators, including the mayor, city commission, regulatory agencies, and other municipal stakeholders. We understand that that's something that's it would be a collaborative effort, something you probably have to sit down with the town of Palm Beach, south of Palm Beach, in order to say, okay, if this were to occur, when are we all in agreement of when this should actually be information be communicated to us? And then also ensure that there's any regulatory, federal, state, or local regulations incorporated in that document as well. And then also establish how the city will confirm toxicity levels. So how are you going to verify your samples? How many samples are going to be taken? Establish protocols for the frequency and the method in which you test the contaminated water. Establish protocols for the frequency of updates for internal and external parties. And then also you could outline how to request water reserves and interconnections and when those are deemed necessary. And then ultimately also document the criteria to remove public advisory notice and when the incident is considered resolved, and also document from whom authorization is needed in order to rescind any future public advisory notices. So that concludes my presentation, and we'll be more than happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Basically, what I heard is that this is uncharted territory. And so we, as a city, as a department, need to come up with our own set of rules to govern any future incidents. And I know we're going to hear from staff right after this presentation. I mean, is that a correct summary of your report?
Yes, it is an unregulated toxin, but that being said, we do think it's best practice that a policy and procedure manual be documented. There always should be a reference point of where staff should reference as a blueprint of when this occurs, what can I do? In conclusion, it is to our belief and our professional judgment based on the interviews and support that was provided by city staff, that city staff under goodwill made decisions and acted promptly on what had occurred. That being said, throughout the entire process of the timeline that we reviewed, there was no policy, procedures, protocols for somebody to reference to, am I following the procedures, have I communicated in a timely manner? Mm-hmm. That being said, outside of having that policy and procedure documented, in the future when there's turnover on staff, there's always a good blueprint to have there when there's a change in management, change in personnel. Where do we start off? How do I fit in this role or process? So that was, in general, how you would summarize the conclusion.
Okay, very good. Questions, Commissioner? Yeah. President Fox.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all the work that you've done on our behalf. I appreciate this very thoroughly.
Is your mic on?
I'm not sure if it can you hear me? I think it's on. My question, I think, is more for staff. So this might be in the follow-up we're going to have in the next presentation. But I'm just curious what the steps are that we're going through to take these recommendations. I know that there's several different sections of procedures that have recommendations. So I'm just wondering if we have started to follow any of them. I know you said this has been out for several months, or if this is something that we as a commission are going to talk about further to decide how to move forward.
I think you may get clarification when we have the next presentation.
One thing I would like to add to that comment is that around the time we were issuing our report, I believe there was a draft that was already being circulated in order to address the recommendations that we had on page 16. So I know that I could definitely speak on. Yeah, attest to.
Okay. Any other questions, Commissioner Lambert?
Thank you so much for the presentation, for the work, and I'm grateful to hear, as I would have expected, that staff and City Hall was very compliant and forthcoming with information. I appreciate the recommendations. I didn't know if you mentioned this, or I didn't see this in here. I would presume that as part of the recommendations of whatever we create related to the unregulated protocols, that then, of course, this would be made available to our constituents who are water users, but any of our water users, such as Town of Palm Beach, then would get this information as well, so that they know ahead of time, these are the rules that we're going to be following.
Absolutely, yes.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Johnson? Absolutely.
Yes, Mayor, I would just like to footnote for the record. So as the board look at the recommendations in terms of establishing formal procedures, that outline the notification, it indicates notification to the city commission, and as the city administrator, I recognize that as the liaison to the board, with being notified on the 25th, about this incident, there was a failure on my part to then inform the city commissioners, and I don't want to publicly let that go with me not recognizing that. That was not a failure on the staff's part. The staff sent that email to administration, myself, and the mayor on the 28th, I believe it was, and that was not communicated immediately by me to the commission. So there was a disconnect and put the commission in a position where you all found out secondhand, and that responsibility falls on my shoulder, not the staff. And so I want to recognize that, and then to also, apologize to the board for you having been put in that kind of position. This is something that you should have been informed directly by the city administrator. So I do want to acknowledge that for the record.
But thank you for that acknowledgement, Ms. Johnson. Any other question? Yeah, Commissioner Peduzzi.
Thank you. One of my concerns is that, we realized that there was potentially a problem on May 17th, and it wasn't until May 28th that city administration was notified. So I didn't look through the recommendations, but I would hope that in the future that at least city administration is given a heads up that there could be a problem. We don't have to do 6 confirmations to know that there's possibly a problem. We knew that on May 17th that we had a problem. And it wasn't until the 28th that that was communicated officially to our city administration and there and after to the public and to the city commission. So that's the main concern that I have.
Right, and we definitely agree, and that's part of our recommendations as well. Based on my discussions and interviews, I think it came from a vantage point of we don't want to alarm anyone unless we're 100% sure. I'm not justifying anything. I'm just I totally agree. But yes, maybe in the future it's, hey, potentially this could be down the pipeline, but the notice is earlier.
Okay, any other questions for Markham, and then we'll hear from. Okay, thank you all very much for this very in-depth report. It is very helpful to us, my administration, and certainly staff to figure out a path forward if we ever encounter this, and we could not do that without you doing the very in-depth work that you have done here. So thank you so much. It's very helpful to us.
Our pleasure.
Thank you. Mr. Fauna, do you want to talk about cyanotoxin monitoring, treatment, and communication strategy?
I do, Mayor. Armando Fauna, Assistant City Administrator. Thank you all for being here. Just before, I want to tee this up for a second here, and thank you, Markham, for your review. It's really important. When we open our taps, we all take for granted that clean water comes out. But I can tell you it's that we use the term source to tap. It's a long road and a complicated road from source to tap. And there is a small army of individuals that work day and night tirelessly to make sure that that magic happens when you open the tap. And some of them are here today, are folks that work in the laboratory, the watershed staff that monitor out at the source to make sure that they're observing and doing the right testing, and then, of course, the folks at the water treatment plant. And that's not even getting it to all the thousands of customers after it gets treated. So there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes, and staff work very hard in making sure that happens and we get the clean water that we need. You heard the Markham report, and now you're going to hear from one of the key staff members that has helped implement some of these Markham recommendations and the recommendations that came from our expert panel last year that you heard from, which are also extremely important. We've come a long way in a year. As you heard, we took the right steps based on the information we had and the guidance that was available at the time, but now we're sort of in control of our own destiny more than we've ever been, because we have internal procedures that we didn't have before that have been very effective. So with that, I'll bring Daryl on to show you what we've done.
Hey, thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. There was a comment asked by Commissioner. On May 17th, we didn't know we had a problem. We knew the treatment wasn't performing. We learned a lot between last May, that all of a sudden it wasn't until really the following week that the people who were performing the sampling came back and mentioned the health advisory level and that we should add more chlorine. So that Memorial Day weekend was a Memorial Day weekend for everybody that's working there. Since then, it's no longer just one person who puts eyes on these results every week. In the back, I'd like to introduce the folks that are on what we call our harmful algal bloom management team. That'd be Jarrett Beckert. Jarrett, just put your hand up. Okay, he's our new lab manager. Lester Galloway, water plant operations superintendent. Water plant manager would be on this team in lieu of him eventually. So, and then the two laboratory supervisors. These are two that really do all the monitoring and get it done. And then Larry, our outreach coordinator, he's on the team as well. So with this team now, I got 4 sets of eyes, 4 sets of ears, 4 mouths, 4 sets of vocal cords to get the communications to everybody that needs it. So let's start. And, oh, never mind, it left me hanging. Okay. Let's do the actual slideshow here. Okay, again, I'm Daryl. I'm your Assistant Utility Director, former plant manager, still acting plant manager. And I'll start with back in March of 2022, the mayor's expert panel released their summary report. In their report, they talked to us about our source waters, the water that we get to treat. They wanted us to increase monitoring and focus on available options. Available options include the well fields that we have and actually looking at and going to the Floridan aquifer for the deep brackish water. They focused on water treatment. They talked about optimizing our treatment process to reduce water quality risk from the cylindrospermopsin specifically. I'm glad they coined my phrase C-toxin because that's 6 syllables and it's a pain to be repeating a dozen times, just so you all know. But the big thing was communications. And on the mayor's panel, we did have a communications expert who helped us form what we have today. And basically improvements within the city, the regulators, and the customers, including the towns. So this plan of ours is called the Harmful Algal Bloom Response Plan. It's been adopted under it's called Annex 1 of our Water Treatment Plant, American Water and Infrastructure Act Emergency Response Plan. It is actually a protected document. It's not public because there's information in there that people could use to sabotage us. Okay? May 2nd, I had Armando finally sign off on it. Work on this plan started on May 29th of 2021. We knew there were some issues. So we had to take a look at it. So what have we done? Source water monitoring. We've established a monitoring schedule that focuses on the toxin levels. During January and February, we're not seeing any toxins. We can reduce our monitoring. During the season, algae season that we're in now, we're doing sampling a lot more frequently, weekly. This year, we've already done several weeks in which we sampled 2 and 3 times. Glad to say that this year, toxin levels are nowhere as close to where they were last year at this time. So we've secured initial well field authorization. We've submitted a water use permit modification to the district. We were looking for 3 things. We were looking for 1, allowing the lakes to increase the elevation or stage level. We were looking for easier access to the well fields. Last year, that was tough. We had to wait till we hit stage levels, which are very low in the lakes when you see them low. And the other thing that we did was we continued with the research program, and hopefully someday we're going to get the results of that study. I keep pushing Jarrett because he's managing that with one of the experts that has continued working with us. In terms of water treatment, we now have treatment action levels based on raw water or the water that's coming into the plant. Okay, those levels there start triggering monitoring activities. You know, when are we going to put the powdered activated carbon in place? When do we start treating with that? Do we start adjusting the basins of the pH in the basins? What they've told us is the lower the pH, the better the chlorine works to oxidize this toxin. We're looking at filter run times. We reduce the run times. It helps actually reduce the penetration of the toxin into the beds. We'll see a reduction there. And the big thing in our savior is chlorine. And since everything that went down last year, we've started adding the chlorine into what we call the clear wells or wet wells under the UV, and that's picked up a lot of time. And we got one more chlorine injection point that we're working on the design and permitting for. In communications, we now have a list of our stakeholder point of contacts. We've reached and already met with the towns. We asked the towns, do you want us to call your council members? And the answer there was absolutely not. So for the town of South Palm Beach, I have the town manager and the town clerk on our list. For Palm Beach, we have the Public Works Department, 3 there, 2 engineers and the director. So when it's time to call, we reach out to them, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, so where are we now? Well, we're understanding our cyanotoxin threat, and it's a cyanotoxin threat because there's 2 toxins that are currently listed by EPA with health advisory levels. The cylindrospermopsin, which is the one that we seem to be dealing the most with. The microcystins are the ones that you keep hearing about on TV. These are the recreational waters. This is the puffy, blue-green, bright algae that everybody's trying to prevent from getting into the canals, lakes, and on our beaches. We know that we can treat it with the carbon and the chlorine. That's our best avenue right now. And hopefully in the next 3-4 months, we'll have another panel working up to start looking at future options in treatment. Communications plan, that's really what we're here to talk about. We now have points of contacts in the city. That includes everybody's here is in the plan. The towns, the regulatory agencies, and the businesses. The agencies that we're keyed in on, Florida Department of Health, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and of course the South Florida Water Management District, because we agreed with them that we'll use the wells after we let them know that we have levels of concern. We have our webpage now. Every week it's there 24/7. People can look and see what the most recent results were. Okay, we have the call down list. These are actual lists of everybody's name and a phone number. And I heard that now you all have AIDS, so I'll add the AIDS to make it good for everybody. So. Email addresses where needed. There's an Everbridge system which calls your phones. It's the same as the Palm Beach County or similar to the alert system. We got press releases. We know what we're looking at. They're already set up if we have to go to a disinfectant switch. And we have the public notification forms. I want you to know that that notice that was sent out has already been pre-approved by the Florida Department of Health. We've passed them to them. There are a total of 2, 4, 6, 8 going on and back. I think there's 16 of them total. Format set up. I'll show you that in a second what it looks like. Timely communications. We have 10 days before anything apparently is supposed to happen to us. We're trying to get it done in 5 to 6. 5 to 6 is a big decision point, and we'll talk about that in a bit. This is our webpage, our Safe Water Dashboard. This was published shortly after the event last year, and it's been running ever since. Last week's results are here. Coming into the plant, we're less than, way less than half of what's actually, the health advisory level at that 0.25. And the point of entry, it's not detected. The decision on how we're going to sample the finished water, the expert panel has recommended strongly that we use what's called liquid chromatography mass spectrometer, LCMS. That's our contract lab. We do have a process in-house that a lot of people have seen, That gives us a good number, okay? And that's the number we're working on because it's conservative. This 0.25 compares to the value that our method shows, which is what we're calling an estimate, which was about 0.4. So when the truth comes out, we're much lower. I've had this conversation with the Department of Health in Tallahassee, and they really, as just like our experts say, don't use the method that we have in-house to make public health decisions, okay? Last year, pretty much that's what we were doing. When we went to DEP and their system, the LCMS, we saw stuff in our raw water, but all of our finished water was clear. So we want to always keep that in mind. Okay, this here.
Repeat that, because I think that's a very important point. So we do have internal testing.
We have internal testing for toxin levels.
But we're not to make the decisions, the public health decisions, based upon the internal testing. We need to get the external testing results, correct?
Correct. We want to get data from an LCMS. I say that again because if I can, we would have bought one last year. So it's still on the table, right, Jared? Okay, all right, don't forget that. What you see here, green is the template number and some instructions. Take this out. The yellow spots are what we have to update and get these published, okay? We can do it. Last year, there was a lot of confusion when we were trying to get the notice out. We were wondering why the health department, we're waiting. We're telling them, EPA, this is an EPA publication and tool for our use. EPA has this. Why aren't you just approving it? It turns out that it's a lot more complicated than that. Health advisories for drinking water by state law are issued by the secretary of the DOH in consultation with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. They're supposed to link together, and if there is a need for bottled water, like we were handing out ourselves, they are to assist. So now we know that we have help in bottled water distribution. If we need it or we're having trouble getting it, they're here to help. So our advisory now says drinking water advisory. Doesn't say health advisory for drinking water. We'll be first on to the drinking water advisory and last off. Talking to the health department, our strategy with them is that we will issue our drinking water advisory and that they'll follow with their health advisory. When we're ready to come off, we'll notify them, or they'll come off before us. They'll release their health advisory, then we will release our drinking water advisory. Okay, that's important scheduling there because last year we were told, yes, go ahead and issue it. Then we got a call an hour later from the agency and say, no, don't. And we're like, what's going on? You know, we had met a clearance that they asked for, which is basically for the distribution system was 2 days with no presence of the toxin in the water and 3 days at the drinking water plant. We're a little bit different than that. We're a little more harder on ourselves in our plan because we now are looking at not just what comes into the plant, we're looking at what's in the next lake and the lake before that and what's in the canal so that we see the whole train that's coming at us. So we can then take and be prepared. Because we may not want to go off and on. This was one of the things that the expert panel's communication person talked about in Salem, Oregon, how difficult they came on to a do not drink. A few days later, they had clearance, they went off. A few days later, had bad samples, they went back on, and everybody took a good beating over that. So we want to keep that in line. So what's our goal? Well, monitoring, you've heard about already. Treatment, we're adjusting based on the monitoring. But communications, want everybody to be informed. You're going to hear about a triggered event, and you're going to know, okay, this is what's going on, so you have that focus there. It's got to be timely. I'll talk about what my expectation is, but what I'll allow in a bit. And it's got to be focused to the issue. Last year, the issue was we had cyanotoxins in our water. But it turned out most of the beating and the concern was over the communications. And I think that's what we want to make sure that everybody's focusing on that they're getting the message and they're getting it there.
Joe, before you go back to the previous slide, please, I just want to get clarification. Have we been in communications with the Department of Health for the content of our drinking water advisory? Have they blessed that?
Yes, that's what, when we said pre-approved, that's what I mean.
All right, so if a situation arises, we don't have to sit by the phone or sit by the email waiting for them to improve language.
No, what's going to happen is they will get a copy of it, and we'll be telling them, we're going to publish this. They're going to then, and understand by that time, everyone up to Tallahassee should be on board, knowing what we're doing and what we're doing here and how we're reacting and what our plans are through the communications plan, okay? And they will use ours, basically, to help format theirs with their whereases and all that they had to put into their formal document. So, what did I do? Well, you guys like this. Communication groups, we have specific groups, there's 4 of them. We have communication activities, what's going to be noticed and when. And we have the communication methods of 5 of those. So we'll take a look at these here. The communications group, there's 4. Group A is our residents. This is information available to them routinely every week on the web page. It's also will be available through press releases if we have an incident, public notifications and that such. Group B is this team, is us. Okay, and we're going to know first is our plan. And the mayor will be heard, what he'll be told, or she, is that we're going to contact the agencies. Okay, first, so that everyone knows. Because once you contact the agencies, the rumors start. Okay, we don't have much control on that. Group C is Palm Beach County. Palm Beach County is one of our suppliers of water during emergency. And the interconnects, if we need to reduce the load on the plant, we can reduce what's going out. Town of Palm Beach and Town of South Palm Beach. And of course, the regulatory agencies, which is DOH, DEP, and the South Florida Water Management District. The entire plan was reviewed and presented to the Department of Health. It took over 2 hours to go page by page through it. And the big request was that on our notifications, we add do not boil, as well as do not drink. So the next thing are the activities that we're concerned with. The top one is having to issue that drinking water advisory, that do not drink. Okay, that's the top one that we're worried about. Second one is an emergency disinfectant switch. By law or rule, the state rules, the regulations, we have to give the public a 24-hour notice before we do this. So 24 hours before we start putting free chlorine out there, we do the switch. We have to notice that, and that's because of hospitals and dialysis centers, PetSmarts, zoos. Got the zoos in there. And they have to make changes in their process. Like I said, I got a boil water, citywide boil water advisory. That's right now not required. It's not recommended for a harmful algal bloom event. But in the future, I got a feeling they'll bring up something else and say, oh, this one you can boil. So I want to be ready for it and have it here now. And the other is just these general status updates that we're giving out. Okay, how are we communicating it? Well, the first method and one is what's required. This is the news media releases. Okay, and this would be required for the do not drink. That would be television, radio, and print. Okay, and this follows the regulatory, what's called a Tier 1 notification process. This is what we did on May 28th last year. Okay, that's what we were working on. The second one is the Palm Beach County Emergency Operations Center, which is our operations center as well, is the Everbridge and Alert Palm Beach County systems. Okay, this way people's phones are ringing, text messages are being sent out. Got one last night for some weather coming through this area. So I knew to call the plant and ask if the generators were on. Don't need that. N3 is what most of you will be dealing with. This is direct contact from somebody. It's a phone call, email, text, or a knock on your office door. You're going to hear from somebody, and I'll show you later how we build in redundancy all the way back to the lab manager and the plant manager. They're going to keep calling. The next two are really just general social media and the print media that we could hand out to bring people up to speed. All right, this is what it looks like. This is the list. And these are just, here we have our group. We have the person or what we're reaching out to. Some of these places, there's just a direct line to the nurses center for the hospitals. The activity codes that they're going to get noticed on, okay? And you'll see that for the hospitals, N3 is direct call, all right? And then I'm going to skip down one more and show you the beach, or the zoo, Palm Beach Zoo and the Cox Center. We also have been given a complete list of the daycare centers and adult care facilities. These are vulnerable populations from the health department, and they could be programmed into the Everbridge system so that those facilities will be getting calls as well. So that's pretty a long way in 10 years, I'll say, from the reverse 911 systems. And then there's the commissioners on here as well. So you're there on the top of the list. All right.
Gerald, before you move off of that, we probably don't want to publish it in the communications because this is a document I assume that will be public.
No, this is not a public document.
Well, if that's the case, then I would suggest we include the commissioners' mobile numbers.
Okay, that's something that if you tell me today it's okay, we can.
Well,
we can get it
it's
in
up to
there.
each
Yeah.
commissioner, but.
Okay. So.
Question on this one as well.
Yeah, Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you. Just a quick question is, how will we keep this up to date? Because I know that, sometimes maybe one of the hospitals might change the nurse's station's phone number or a new daycare center may come online. How will you keep this updated?
For your team, it's easy. There's a call to election, so that stands out. For the county health department, that's easy. We know when they retire or we get a new person. The centers, basically every year it's a review. And just like my hurricane drill, the administration team gets to call everybody. And if you don't answer your phone, then all of a sudden it gets flagged and we have to find another way. And that could include sending out my distribution team to knock on the door and say, hey, listen, this is where we're at. Last year, when we went on the emergency disinfectant switch, the team went out there and they met with people and they told them, okay, we got it. We met with the maintenance supervisor. Well, we got calls from some of the 3 letters, the CEO, CFOs, COOs, about why didn't you call me personally? Okay, give me your number. I'll add it to the list. After about an hour, they called me back and said, well, I really want you to call the 24-hour nurses station. That's the person who needs to know. So we got a lot of people who backed off, but we do have multiple, we're trying for contact numbers in there as well.
Darryl, I was going to add, and for a lot of the institutions, we're not necessarily calling an individual, but
yeah,
like he said, the nurse's station or it's the institutional number that they provide to us, not the individual.
Yeah, because what we're asking for is give us the number that we can call that's a person that can get the information out. We just did the switch 3 weeks ago, and I called down my list after my team called it down to check. And I only hit one person who said they didn't get a call. And then about a half hour later, I got a call back from that facility that the person my people said they spoke to said, yes, we did get the call. And your guys did show up. So that was, that made me feel good because usually you only get about 90%, penetration on any regulatory rule you adopt.
So the short answer to the commissioner's question is that you do an assessment at least once a year.
Yeah, the plan will have to be reviewed annually, and I tagged that for the January, February when we're not worried about toxins. That's the time to get it updated. Usually in hurricane season, everything's kind of tied to there. We'll start looking again to see if there's anything new that's going on. But yeah, at least once a year, we tag it and we check the numbers.
Follow up.
Yes.
I recall you said something about we moved away from, or we've come a long way from reverse 911, and I'm not suggesting that that might be the answer, but it just seems like a lot of work and a lot of onus on us to make sure that these numbers are correct every year even, and let's say it changes mid-year. I just wonder, and we don't have to go into the details today, but just if there isn't a way where we can have folks opt into this so that if the CEO wants to be one of the ones, as well as the nurse's station, to get the phone call, he or she can choose to do so.
And I think, go ahead.
Yeah, the Everbridge that he mentioned, so that's one of the tools that we're looking at.
Okay.
That can also allow us to target even neighborhoods if something is only impacting certain neighborhoods, and you can opt in or we can put people in, so.
Fantastic, thank you.
You're welcome. Actually, thank you guys, because we wouldn't have it if you didn't approve it, and it got in someone's budget. So, okay, weekly updates. Okay, we talked about before we monitored water coming into the plant and going out once a month. We monitor now the water coming into the plant every week. And we monitor the water after our treatment every week using our in-house process. Based on that data, we may trigger monitoring the point of entry. But if we're showing water coming into the plant on our method, which it's giving us higher readings than what's actually there, and it's lower than the health advisory level, we're pretty good, we're in real good shape. The email that goes out, right now it's coming from me, eventually it'll be the laboratory manager, once we get a plant manager over there, goes to Armando. It's copied to the health department, it's copied to the water management department, the water management district, and to the Department of Environmental Protection, the 3 contacts that we have there. We're copying the county and the towns. The subject line is the most important thing because that's what Armando is going to read. It says safe to drink, okay? I don't hope that never changes. That's got to stay. But then we get into a little bit more. The first 3 lines talks about what we sampled, source water, the processed water, which is everything that we sample within the plant, and then the finished water, if it was a week that we sampled, what was going out into the plant. It tells them where we're at. And within the plan, we set certain levels, up to level 4. Level 1, we're below half of any of those health advisory levels. Level 2, we're between half and 100%. Level 3, 100% and 200. And last year, we were above 200%, so that's level 4. All right, tells them where we're at and what's the issue. Cylindrospermopsin is it. Then we get into a bunch of the technical data, the actual concentrations that my regulatory agencies are going to want to know. Because the Water Management District, if my level on our monitoring system coming into the plant is above half of 50% of a health advisory level, we have an authorization, a temporary operating permit approved by them to go ahead and activate the wells. Last year, we had reached the stage levels, the water had come down to a point where they say you can operate the one field, but we hadn't reached the second stage to operate the western well field. So the eastern was on, the western wasn't off. Under this new temporary plan that they've told us we can operate both well fields, and we can run 6, actually it's 110 days is what they put in there. We're looking at, as soon as we get the results enough to show us what we actually need, which we believe right now is less than that, which is great, that we'll be able to go back with a more formal plan and get the permit amended.
Darrell, before you move on, I think it's just important to emphasize a couple of things for the commissioners and for the public that you just mentioned. And these are changes since last year. One is that we have now the in-house capability to do the testing with the ELISA method. And as Darrell has mentioned, I'll reiterate, it is much more conservative than what is actually out there. So when we do a measure, and we're now in condition level 2, let's say, there's already been one case where we actually were in condition level 1, because once we got the confirmation back from the lab in Tallahassee, it confirmed that the levels were lower than what we have documented because our method is going to be conservative. The second thing that we have is now this kind of like approval ahead of time from the South Florida Water Management District to allow us to access the wells ahead of time based on these triggers. Last year, as Darrell mentioned, we had to go through a fairly long process to be able to get that blended water in, which really seems to be knocking down the levels of toxins. So those are 2 key things that we have now in place that we didn't have last year.
Okay, thanks, Armando. There's responsibilities for the management team. There's responsibilities for the management, upper management, myself now, and our director, and then city administration as well. And we have a drinking water advisory board, and the mayor of the town of Palm Beach is on it. And we were giving the feedback to them, and she gave me some feedback that her staff has been reporting everything to her. So I was glad to hear that, and I think Armando's keeping you up there right now, so everything's going good. So I want to hear, okay, triggered events. This is when I need your attention. When my algal bloom and the raw water coming into the plant is higher than the health advisory levels, you guys are going to be alerted to that. That's one of the events you want to need. Anything below the health advisory coming in, you got time to think about everything else that's on your job and your schedule to do. Once we get above that, you need to be aware of it. Okay, the next one is,
and again, that's raw water. That is not finished water.
Coming
that's
into
raw
treatment,
water.
right? So Lester promised me the worst thing that could happen is that it'll be only a little bit lower than what it came in, correct? That's everything we have. So the next thing that you'll hear, next triggered event, is if we start seeing cyanotoxins in the finished water. Now, they may be below the health advisory or they may be above, but that's when you'll be contacted the next time. You'll also be contacted when we start going the other way. In other words, when we fall back below the health advisory levels of the water coming in. All right? Same as the finished water. The next things start coming to decisions that we have to make with the mayor. Okay, when do we want to go and do the disinfectant switch? The health department has implied that if the level is 50% of the health advisory level, that we need to do something, take actions at that point. EPA says if you're below the health advisory, there's no health impacts that you need to worry about. We're in a position here, how's it going to look if we don't do something? So the emergency disinfectant switch is probably something that we would do. We would do that not based on just what's going out, but what's coming down the canal, I can say, because it's coming from the M Canal all the way from the L8 out west. We will have data, and we can say it's either going to be getting better or it's going to be getting worse. So we know that now, and we could see that. And the last thing I ever want to say again is a drinking water advisory. So, but you need to know if it's coming out so that you're ready for it. In our plan, you'll know first. After everyone here, I've got acknowledgments, then we'll move to the health department, because there we got to do consultations on what they expect. Like I said, let's say our drinking water, finished water going out is half of the health advisory level. You know, they may want us to issue a do not drink at that point. That's where we'll have to come back and huddle. We consult with them and figure out how we want to do it. So, okay, so like it or not, there is a time frame. Things have to happen first before we can make decisions. And so thank you, Larry, for the fancy graphics. This is the best you'll see today. Days 1 to 3 that we're going on. And keep in mind, we've been watching the levels all along going up or coming down. You're advised of when the raw water coming in has gotten at a high level. So there's already a certain amount of expected, informed level of knowledge. So our samples, we'll be sampling our source water. That's the canals, the lakes, and the raw water coming in. The processed water, all throughout the plant to see what's working, what's not, where we're getting our removal. And our finished water results. Our finished water, we will have results within 3 days. Okay? Now, for in-house, I'll have the results really the same day for a good portion of the toxin levels. There's two things happening that's called extracellular and cellular toxins, and we got to figure one is the total. So with that, knowing those differences, we get the extracellular first. It's usually been about 90% or more of the whole total toxin levels. So we could actually make treatment adjustments that day, or start making adjustments, and actually even resample maybe later that day. Just have to keep the lab people there. Okay, so between days 2 and 3, it's a triggered event. One of those events that we just talked about. We're going to be giving notices to everybody here in the city. The regulatory agencies, Palm Beach and South Palm Beach, they'll know where we're at here. They'll know that we're taking action and we're doing our treatment. The next big one is, again, dates 2 to 5. Okay, treatment adjustments, increased sampling, probably daily at this point, and results. And we'll have confirmation, hopefully within 5 days, that we didn't have a bad number. That it just wasn't, something that, we sample 100 milliliters out of 200 million gallons going out, or 20 million a day. So we do want to verify that. So by day 5, we're pretty much ready for days 4 to 6 to start making our decisions of where we want to be. Earliest is day 5. Last year we made our decisions on day 10 and a half. Okay? The regulatory program, everything starts after a confirmation sample in terms of violations. That's why when the health department was saying we didn't get notice out to them before day 10, we kept saying, what are you talking about? We got our confirmation on this day. We're on day 8. What you said finally lit up to us. The bulb went off and said, oh, you're right. You started drinking the water the day I took the sample. So that was something that we learned, and it made sense after we heard about it. Okay, so logic diagrams. Oh, God. You had one engineer this morning, you got another one this afternoon. Well, still this morning. the harmful algal bloom management team back there, the lab manager, the water plant manager, the watershed superintendent, and the outreach coordinator. Like I said, they meet every week and review the data. There is no, oh, it's January, we don't have to do it. Right, Jared? That's right, okay, I want to hear that. Responsibilities, they set the monitoring. They set the source water selection. Are we going to use the wells? Can we use the wells? It's the C17 cleaner. Can we use that water? So all that to help blend and get to where we want to be. And of course, the last on the treatment. Can we go up with the chlorine? Can we come down with it? What do we need to do? Fire up the powdered activated carbon. The responsibility here is initiating the communication stream, usually 2 days after the sample is collected, because we'll have all our results. All right? The expectations that I have is the weekly meetings and weekly updates, which was the report I showed you. Now, there's actually a big flow chart. I'm only cutting it up because I can't read it, it's that big. But each of these, and I don't know, can I circle it here? Yeah, each of this here, this code, N3, that is the verbal communication. B12, that is a specific position within our organization. Okay, LS, it's the lab supervisor. N3, B12, actually it's the specific within, that's still the lab supervisor, I'm sorry. So that person is responsible for moving this chain here of communications. Within the city, the team, PUD management, the city administration, the mayor, and the commissioners. The way the duplication works down here is that the lab manager will directly contact the utility director. Utility director then contacts the administration and the mayor if they're unable to get a hold of anybody or doesn't get any feedback that the mayor heard. That's these two lines up here. Okay? And Ms. Johnson, just so you know, you're A1 on the list. However it turned out, I was like, okay. Ideally, all of this is communicated internally. Okay? We're looking, you're going to get this notice during one of the triggered events. I'm looking for it to be completed or acknowledged back to me within 2 to 4 hours. Okay? I don't think that's that unreasonable considering it's really a phone call to each or even a knock on the door. And then feedback as to any questions that come back should be asked there. Okay. The next big thing is the agency communications. This is after the mayor has been alerted and everyone that we're going to go over there. The laboratory manager and the assistant utility director are engaged in here. It's routine and triggered events. We're talking to these guys still almost every week, regardless of what's going on. They get the report, even if it's just a thank you and acknowledgement email back. The Florida Department of Health is consultation and agreement of where we need to do and what they want us to do and what we agree to do. The DEP is for assistance. They're now available if we need to secure bottled water because we can't get it locally as much as we need, they're there. And of course, South Florida Water Management District, that's well notification. We give notice that we're going to have to fire up the well fields. And then last but not least is our partners. And these calls are being made by myself. They go to the Palm Beach County Water Utility Director. They go to the town of Palm Beach, their Public Works Director, their senior, I think it's process engineer, and their technical engineer. They got 3 people over there. And also down to the South Palm Beach, it's the town manager, Mr. Kellogg, and the town clerk, Yule. So ideally, they carry through on their part. Okay, so we will have, because of the way last year went, we will be documenting calls and times. That way it doesn't take 2 hours to answer Hermes' questions when he comes back to me. All right, so here's the end cap. Between their help and they were help, I want to thank you for bringing them on because everybody brought us ideas. And the plan started being written probably last June, okay, as things were going. And between the mayor's expert panel and the crew here, this is where we're at. So on their first recommendation, we've identified our defenses, how we can control and respond to the toxic events. We've established an internal notification strategy in the plan. We've listed our cyanotoxins and their health advisories levels within the plan. They're clear. We've established formal communication procedures with the city administration, the mayor, the commission, the agencies, and our partners. They're there. We have identified the regulatory notification requirements. There really are none, but we know what they want and what they expect, and they're part of this whole communication plan. So they're going to be informed. They can't tell us they're not. Okay, we have the pre-approved templates, the web page with EPA links. We have established the LCMS method for the finished water, period. We're not going to use any other method to estimate or guess, no matter what. Even if they're asking us for use your algae counts. No, we're measuring the toxin levels. That's what's important here. We do require confirmation samples going each way, going onto it and coming off of it. And there's a lot of discussion about coming off of an advisory. There's a lot more to come off of the advisory than it is to go on it, because we don't want to be gone back and forth with it. We've established treatment, monitoring, and communication protocols. They're set. We've established a relationship with the South Florida Water Management District. That one was important. They've approved the temporary operating plan under the water use permit. We had one chance, two incidents this year where we got to use that temporary operating permit. The levels reached 0.37 coming into the plant. 0.35 would be one of the 50%. When we turned it on, we ran for 10 days, the well field. When we turned it off, our measurements in Lake Mangonia, which had reached almost HL, the health advisory level, were almost cut in half on that 10 days worth of well time. And they stayed low for 5 more weeks until we finally just got back up and we started running the well fields a week ago now. Last week. And I think this Friday we'll shut off on our run, our 14 days. And last week's sampling showed that Lake Mangonia had dropped a little bit for us. And today's results will show us how much. If we're seeing that, then we're looking at a pulse, where we pulse the water into the system to help reduce the toxin levels to get where we need to be without our neighbors complaining that we're basically sucking the groundwater table away from them, because we hear that. And we've established procedures for moving into and out of each triggered event. So with that, it's been a lot of work.
Well, thank you for that presentation. And what is evident is that a lot of thought, a lot of time has gone into implementing procedures and policies so that we are in a better position than we were a year ago. And that's all we can ask for, is that we use what happened last year as a springboard for improving our processes. And it's clear that you and your team have given that a lot of thought and put a lot of effort into it. So I truly, truly appreciate that, and the public should appreciate that, we are better than we were a year ago. So thank you. Questions, commissioners? Commissioner Ward.
In the event that this does happen and we get a call letting us know that there's a situation, what's the time between that and a follow-up with kind of a blurb so that we can tell the residents what's going on without having to actually, make it up ourselves or repeat what you said on a phone call versus something official?
We don't want you to make it up, that's for sure.
Yeah. I don't want to remember. I guess that's my concern, is I don't want to, have to repeat something. So is it going to go to like Kathleen to have like a blurb for us to be able to approve something to blast out to neighborhood associations and things like that?
So on the management team is Larry. He's our outreach, and his job is to coordinate with Kathleen so that you have that blurb, so that you can get something there. Something that says, this is where we're at. Yeah, we're seeing high levels. We're having an algae bloom in the lakes. Treatment process is working. Algae levels are really, have increased greatly in the lake. The treatment process is working. However, we are seeing toxin levels. Check the webpage. We're going to a disinfectant switch because the treatment process is being exceeded because the values in the lake, the raw water coming into the plant, is just too high. Okay? That's what we want.
And it's important to understand that we'll be in communication with you on what that messaging is, because what we don't want to do is panic the public over something that they don't need to be panicked about. And, you know, the easiest analogy I can make, and I mentioned it the other day, I was like, why didn't I think about this before? You know, if you're out in the sun, if you walk to your car right now, you're gonna get some exposure to radiation, but it's irrelevant. And maybe you stay out a couple of hours, you might get a little bit more. At some point, you're gonna get burned. But we don't wanna panic the public over walking to the car. So that's, you know, why we gotta balance out our communications strategy with how we inform the public and making sure that we're balanced in our approach to doing that.
And it sounds like we are being a lot more proactive with our testing, et cetera. So when you do feel the need to notify the commissioners, are we still below the health advisory levels even at that point?
Yes.
Yeah, the first three triggered events, we will still have safe water to drink.
Right.
Right.
So when the raw water coming in is high, but the water going out is clean, you were safe. When the toxin levels start to show up, we're still safe as long as we're below the health advisory level. When we switch to the disinfectant switch, the water's going to be safe to drink. Then the last one, the do not drink, at that point, that's a whole different story there.
So the point is, commissioners, you will have received notification along that timeline. And so, yes, we will work on sufficient talking points between Larry and my director of communications so that you're not just having to make it up.
And the information on the testing will be on our website as it is now as well, so.
All right, Commissioner Warren and then Commissioner Peduzzi.
Hi, I have to preface my questions and comments by I probably watched too many Mad Max movies back in the 80s that make me hypersensitive. But I do appreciate the transparency and the report that we've received from Markham that shows that what the city did in reference to this event and how timely we responded. I appreciate the proactive approach to mitigate risk by the things that we do with regulating something that is unregulated, by monitoring that information to make sure that we stay abreast of any issues. And I also appreciate the relationships that the mayor and the city has with other agencies that helped us during this critical time in order to be able to expedite testing and get things done in a very efficient way. My first question is, as we listen to the outcome of the investigation, and they talked about that we didn't have a lot of other agencies or municipalities to compare this information to, and that there wasn't anything in place by the health department. Is that primarily because we, as a city, are one of the few municipalities that use surface water as our source, and that was a reason that we were impacted in a way that others have not been?
Okay. I'm going to say there's two parts to your question for me to keep it straight. First of all, yeah, we're one of the few surface waters.
In Florida.
In Florida. Mm-hmm. And we are, our water is susceptible to the cyanotoxins. I mean, it's basically sampled throughout the canals, the Lake Okeechobee, everywhere. So it's here all the time at levels that may be below the detection levels of the current method. All right? So with that said, let me go to the back part of your question there, because I wanted to answer that first. And what was the other part of that you were asking is, was it a surprise? The public notification rule that I quoted for the Tier 1 doesn't call out cylindrospermopsin or microcystins. It just has this clause that says any other thing, and anything else sort of that can impact the water. And that's why that morning of the 28th, they called it the health department, said, hey, the unregulated contaminant rule says I have to give public notice within 12 months of the confirmation sample. Well, that would have been this May that we're telling people. The EPA guidance templates say do not drink. And that's what the first question that went to the health department was, is, hey, what are we doing here? What's the state's expectation? And so the clarification was it fell under that any other, and that we had to do that Tier 1 notice. So, yes, we're going to have this, and they weren't dealing with it anywhere else. The Okeechobee city, this Okeechobee utility up there, they're actually set up just for this. They have a completely different treatment process. They're 5 million gallons a day. I went up there and visited there. They have an ozone system and what's called an active flow versus our great big basins that we use. So they're a little bit different. They're using the same lab to do their testing, and so they're fighting it for a long time, but they feel that they're real comfortable because when they decided to lower the lake levels, I believe she said the Army Corps of Engineers dug them a trench way out to really deep water out in the lake. So that's why they haven't been seeing too many impacts.
We acted quickly to incorporate well water and chlorine to mitigate the risk. Do we know how long we would be able to utilize that type of solution? Like, how long would we be able to use chlorine before it would become a negative?
Well, there are levels that, and that
Okay,
goes to the
so-
notifications we give to the public on the chlorine.
So the disinfectant switch has an impact on we got, the issue last year of the disinfection byproducts. So a long term on that would be basically, when I was at the health department, we said if during your quarter you were on a free burn, free chlorine in your distribution for more days of the month of the quarter than you would have been off of it, you have to sample during that quarter. That would show that we would have high THM levels. We're on the numbers right now. We'll come off in the 21 days, which is what they consider to be a normal practice, and they allow that. That's not going to upset the world. If you average it out, you'll be safe levels still. So we've been on chlorine long before this, okay? We've treated it not because of cyanotoxins, but because of bacteriological contamination. The whole UV system that we have now was from an event in 2007, which boiled water here for 9 days in the city. It was not a great week and a half. It wasn't, the mayor was nice, but not as great as my current mayor. Long nights on the phone with her as a regulator. I mean, I'm getting calls. What happened is the UV system focuses on bacteriological contamination, and it cleans that up. There used to be a post segment, a very long pipe, gave us 4 minutes of contact time. In that pipe, we took the color using free chlorine out of the water. We basically burned it up, and so it went away. Our THM numbers, our disinfection byproducts, were low, okay? When we built this new, we shortened that pipe. That is why is our treatment system different, not working the same? That's our biggest conclusion of everything that I've looked at. So.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Commissioner
Sorry.
Guzzi.
Thank you. So from what I'm hearing, I think that the key to knowing whether there's a problem on the horizon is in the sampling and making sure that we're doing regular sampling all along our water distribution or our water, source route. My understanding is that we initiate the sampling at the L8 and then in the M5 and then in Grassy and then in Clear Lake and in Lake Mangonia. Are those the places that we do the sampling?
Our core sampling is Clear Lake, Lake Mangonia, the C-17 canal, and the M canal. Okay, when we start hearing reports from the district and DEP that there's activity out in the lake or the canals, we'll go out there and take a sample. The actual watershed guys team that we have are actually on patrol looking for visible signs of the Lake Okeechobee type blooms. So we'll go out there and check the water. If we hear something, we've shut down the control structure twice this year already. We said stop until we can verify if there's anything, if the water management district is shipping anything out the L8 canal that's going to hurt us. And they've pretty much shut down their discharges as well. So then our water supply, as long as it's not growing, it gets increased.
But Commissioner, the toxin that we're talking about here, the majority of what we've seen, it actually originates within our lakes.
Yeah, it's within our lakes is where the cylindro is
different than the blue-green, which does come a lot of times from.
Would we get notified if there was a problem in the Lake Okeechobee, or would we not maybe know until it enters the L8?
There's actually a monitoring system that the district puts out that tells you when there's blooms in the lake. I mean, I get them, you get them.
Yeah, we're getting a daily report from the Water Management District, a daily report from DEP, and a weekly report that has the satellite views and where everything's at. The most recent event was the Canal Point. The health department posted a health hazard there for the recreational use. Made a personal trip out to our starting point was the S-271, which is about 5 miles north of that, to see if we saw anything there. Saw a little bit there, so we shut the control down until we could run our own samples in the canal. So, and what our goal here is to be able to go a day's worth of water upstream and a day's worth downstream, because when they stop discharging, then we actually pull from, it's basically a long lake at that point.
Further questions? Commissioner Lambert?
Thank you. I appreciate the conversation about a balanced approach, but understanding that in a void of information is usually when panic and false information gets spread. So thank you for taking the time to put together these recommendations and implement them. We've talked a lot about being proactive in our efforts, and I understand that this is, we're having to do this because this is a non-regulated toxin. Are there any others that we're catching within this, or that we'll be able to apply this to, that, maybe are on the horizon, that haven't quite flagged us yet, but we're watching them?
Yep, we are. What's called the Unregulated Contaminants Monitoring Rule 5 is coming up, and in there they have the PFAS. That's the forever chemicals, as they call them. We're getting ready for that. The EPA just adopted, or published, they don't adopt, they publish a health advisory. The old advisory was 70 parts per trillion. They've adopted it now, dropped it to 0.004 parts per trillion, which the instruments can't even measure. And this is, everybody's going, what do you, just call it zero. But again, zero would be 0.5, because that's the way the math is. You talk to an engineer. So that's why they got to go 004, even though they don't have that method. So next year, we'll be having to run those samples, as well as some additional cyanotoxins they added to it.
All right. President Fox?
Thank you. I know when we last heard from the advisory committee, and you just mentioned it a little bit now, there was talk about how our lakes were part of the problem, Clear Lake. And I'm wondering if, for example, Grassy Waters is more preserved from traffic, hopefully forever, but also it's shadier. It just seems like it doesn't seem to have the climate that we do here over the lakes. Is there any consideration to anything that can be done, or do you, in your opinion, is that part of the reason that, I guess, that the lakes are part of the problem?
All our testing coming out of the M Canal, which is the water from L8 and from Grassy, has tested below the detection limit. So everything's been in our lakes. How did it get there? We don't know, because we haven't been monitoring the lakes like we are now. It's there, and we have to deal with it. Personal theory, all the heavy hits with the high salinity water that my treatment plant loved, because it knocked down and killed the algae in the lake, that the cylindrospermopsin is more optimistic, it can reproduce faster than the good algae. If we get a good algae base, that can actually limit the amount of the toxins. So somehow we have to reestablish that in the lakes if we're going to keep going. The well water, it looks like we are being proactive there and hitting it early. We don't want to wait till it's way too high that it's, there's nothing we could do about it. So if this pulse theory works out for us, I think we'll be in a good shape to at least eliminate those triggered events, which is what my goal is. Really don't want to be calling everybody.
This last year, we were collecting a lot of good data. And so in the next couple of years, these methodologies of how we observe and treat are gonna change based on these observations and the testing we're doing and the data that's being collected. And I think, Mayor, you made this point probably a year ago, that we'll probably end up being the municipality that people look towards when they have issues like this, because we'll be way ahead of the game.
And I don't think it's quite accurate to say our lakes are the problem.
Yeah, because they're not a problem 98% of the time.
Right. I mean, we
They're
may
the
see
source.
it
This is
in our
where
lakes,
the
but-
algae's reproducing.
but we have a strategy for addressing it.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Okay. Well, listen, thank you again very much for this very in-depth presentation. But more importantly, thank you for working to make our system even more resilient.
It's just not me, but thank you, and I'll let them all know
Thanks
that.
to all the team, yes.
Yeah, that everybody
All
knows.
of you.
All right, thank you, guys.
Thank you all. All right, I don't have anything on the mayor's matters. Commissioners, do you have anything for the general good of the body? Okay, hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.